Microphone on. Right. Well, if the chairman turns up, I suspect that I ought to step down immediately and let him chair. But as he isn't here, and we're very sorry to know he isn't, because he's very good at his job, I think we better make a start. Hello! Well done. We've even got the microphone on for you. Are you ready?
So, good morning. Apologies for the delay. So if we can start with item 1, which are the minutes of the 18th of September, pages 4 to 12. Are there any corrections or omissions? Are you happy I sign those as a correct record? Thank you. No matters arising. Apologies, Julie.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have apologies from Councillor Kittle-Morris and Councillor Richmond and Councillor Webb.
Thank you. I know that Mark Kittle-Morris is still suffering from COVID, so we wish him well and a speedy recovery. And it's appropriate that in this meeting we're considering alternative arrangements for substitutes. Good. So item 4 is urgent business. Now you've been sent a copy of a ministerial letter, and that effectively puts some additional workload on the catch-up process. I don't know, David, do you have any inclination as to whether that will hit us at the same time as the main audit, or whether that will be a separate exercise?
I think this is to be determined at the moment. So our original plan was to risk assess during 25-26 to work out where the gaps in assurance was. I think it's quite evident when we look across the whole sector that there's not enough audit capacity to clean that gap in 1 year. So there's going to have to be some form of prioritisation. We had asked the stakeholders to help with that prioritisation in terms of which councils' audits would you like auditors, and that's not just EY, that's all audit firms, to focus on to rebuild assurance. Is it the large ones? Is it the small ones? Is it the ones closest? That kind of way of prioritising. I think that letter and that communication starts to indicate that actually focus on those closest to rebuild seems to be the message, but that isn't confirmed yet.
And does that include us?
You're probably tier down from the top tier, so those absolutely closest to getting back to a clean opinion. I'd say you're kind of slightly behind them, but certainly not down in the bottom area where we've still got audits and councils where we have not done an audit in 24-25, either because they couldn't produce a set of accounts in time or they couldn't produce any supporting working papers. So you're a long way from that kind of category, but there are still councils falling into that bracket. I think the prioritisation bit will happen during 5-6, and that's when I'll be able to give you better detail. But of course, prioritisation is one point. The next point is whether the councils can, as you say, have the capacity to essentially deal with potentially 2 audits in 1 year. So that's another ask upon the finance team. But we won't just plough ahead with it. We will prioritise and agree with the council in terms of the optimum timing for doing that work.
Okay, I mean, discussing this with Alison, I think the concern is that a whole additional raft of questions arrive at the same time as the main audit. But if we can have sort of prior notice of the likely questions, so some preparatory work can be done, that would assist the process. Would you agree, Alison?
Thank you. Yeah, certainly we work closely with EY to try and make sure that both EY and ourselves have the resources available at the right time. So yes, anything prior is always helpful from our point of view, as well as yours, I think.
And then we're within the timetable, we're starting to overlap with LGR as well. Although, I mean, you are a backward-looking organisation in terms of financial performance, but presumably we will still have to, in arrears, complete full sets of accounts even post-vesting date.
Yes, but when you know what the picture is in terms of LGR, there will need to be some sort of delegated approval or responsibilities to the new bodies to pick up responsibility for closing out the last set of financial statements. I've gone through something similar, so I worked on Northamptonshire County Council, and they did their local government, and they did their local government reorganisation. So we did their county council and the legacy district councils. They were not signed off until about a year or 2 after the new unitaries were set up. So and it's not just Northamptonshire, there's other obviously counties that have gone through a similar process. So there is a path, but yes, you will need a full set of accounts for the final year, whatever the final year is.
Okay, and I think the LGA, there's an email this morning that they're doing a training session on LGR and finance on the 15th of January. I've booked in, and Will Nunn, as his regional peer role, has reminded members that it's happening, so we will try to be informed. Thank you. So I think that concludes the urgent business. So we go on to declarations of interest, if there are any. There are none. So non-members don't really have any today, other than officers, obviously. Training, there is a possibility of a 1-hour training period, which we could either deliver before or after the next meeting. And can I ask, I think if we go before, I'd like to probably delay the start of the meeting. If we did a 9:30 training and a 10:30 meeting, is that preferred, or would you rather have the training afterwards? Yeah, and if we go for 9:30 with a delayed start, is that, I know that means Julie's got to send out notices. Does that work with everyone else? Yes? Okay, so that's, we resolve to do that. So we then move on to internal audit progress report, Teresa.
So this is our first progress report for 25-26. So on page 17,
Could you move the microphone a bit, please?
is that a bit better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So page 17, this gives us an overview at a glance of where we are. So we've got 9 audits in the year. We haven't got any final reports yet, but we do have 2 in draft. So we are moving forward. And we've got 1 behind and a deferred. And we've got a new audit that's coming for the deferred audit. So if we go to page 19, it's the Attleborough Leisure Centre capital project lessons learnt review that's been deferred to next year, and that's because the project is still not complete, so we can't do that until that's complete. And I think that will be maybe Q2, depending how quickly the project completes before that one gets done next year. So we then talked about with management team, is there another audit that we would bring forward? And the one that we talked about that's now in the plan is the private sector housing one. So that's the one where it was a limited assurance a year or so ago, and we want to look at the improvements that have been made. So we all agree that would be a good one to bring forward. In terms of the audit that's behind, that has now moved on since I did the report. I'm now expecting a draft to come through to me this week. They've done the debrief, and then the work goes through the quality cycle, and then I get a draft, so that should come to me. It may well therefore get issued before Christmas, but I think it's a combination of annual leave and just the information not coming through quickly enough to get that one through the schedule that it originally had. And in terms of outstanding recs, we're doing very well. I think if there was a leaderboard, you'd be in the lead with less than 10 outstanding recommendations, so that's really good. I'm happy to take questions, thank you.
Any questions from members? Yes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Teresa, for your report there. Just got sort of a couple of questions going into the report. Really I'm looking at Q3 and also Appendix 1 and Appendix 3. So I'll just go through those 3 if you want to, and then reply when I've finished. I've noted 1 and Q3, there was a reference there under, I think, corporate comes back, delays in receiving information. So I don't know if you could expand on that. The other point I noticed in Appendix 1 was data protection. There's a reference there to matters being behind. And then in Appendix 3, there's a reference there to antisocial behaviour and fly tipping. And obviously, that's both of which are sort of interest in different market towns, particular, in my own ward, however. And no sort of precise data around the sign-off for that procedure. Those are the things there. Not unduly concerned, but it would just be helpful to have any background information or update, Teresa. Thank you.
Yes, I think the data protection one was the one I was referring to, where they've had that debrief, and now I should be getting the draft. And the reasons for it are this information not coming through quickly enough for it to go through its schedule. And I think there was annual leave in there. That might have been on the client side, which again, if they don't schedule that within their schedule of times, then you get behind almost immediately if we're not careful. So we do try and say to the contractors, try and find out as much about people's annual leave and work around it and put your schedule in accordingly, because then the audit stays on track in accordance with what's going on, and obviously life happens. But yes, that one is now coming through, so we should get the draft report next week. On the antisocial behaviour one, I don't know whether officers might need to give a bit more of an update. We have got the revised due date in, so I guess that means it's taking them a bit longer to get to where they need to be. I don't know whether officers have any more news. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, so with regards to the ASB and fly tipping one, and I think there's 2 on there, effectively, when we got that audit through, the management comment that was submitted around that was for the sign-off process, we'd need to hire in some vacant posts. That is why we've then had the extension, because those posts weren't filled. I would need to check with the team as to whether those posts have been filled, but effectively, I think our belief is the process and how we operate in that area is in place. Is just we need the individual in there to sign off on the process to sort of get that up and running. So I think we're looking at not April, February at the moment, but I will just check with the team in HR as to where we are with those vacant posts.
David. Thanks, Chair. The area that stands out with the outstanding recommendation is contracts and procurement, where there's still an outstanding recommendation going back 3 years. I wonder whether you've got any comments or clarification on that.
Level
Page
3 one, isn't it?
21.
Thank you. So yes, the reason for the delay in that one is because we were waiting for the new Procurement Act to be bedded in, because we didn't want to write the policy and then have to change it again. That has now been bedded in throughout this calendar year, but the resources in the team have been stretched because it's taken a lot to implement. So it's on the forward plan now to come through the committee cycle in March next year. So we are due to start working on it very soon. But yeah, the delay was partly resource and partly due to waiting for the new Act.
Right. And Alison, does the new procurement procedures that we had address all the major issues? Hopefully, the answer is yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so that was approved at your last
Yes.
committee, wasn't it? Yes, and that changes the constitution, brings it all up to date for the new Act. So yes.
Okay, and just a question on the internal audit on fly tipping. Are you looking at the adequacy of the policies or compliance with our adopted policies, or both?
I believe it is to do with the procedure around when fly tips are reported and how that is dealt with through the team, is my understanding. I will clarify that, Chair, and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. And there was there's a note here that Simon Stubbs hadn't replied to the network management, hadn't provided an update on the recommendation. Has there been any further movement on that? On this, on page 12.
I don't believe there's been a further update to that, but I will discuss that with him after this.
Okay, I mean, if there is an update, perhaps you can share that with us ahead of the next meeting. Thank you. Any other matters? Yes, David. There's lots of Davids here today.
Quick question for Ryan, really. I notice on page 10 that you still have a vacant post, which is unfulfilled at the moment. Yes? You had 2 senior EPO posts, vacant posts. You've only recruited one of them in September. Are you still looking now for the second post?
So that links into the question which Councillor Clark raised, which is I need to check what we're doing with that outstanding post. But public protection is a challenging area to hire into nationally and regionally. So, but I will clarify where we are with the recruitment process on that.
Okay, any more questions? So the recommendation is that members review progress with the Internal Audit Plan 25-26 and approve the changes and review progress with outstanding internal audit recommendations. Could I have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer David Wickerson, seconder Linda King. Thank you. So we now move on to item 9. Which is the update on the 24-25 audit. David Riglar.
Thank you, Chair. So, talking to Alison, we thought this would be useful for the committee just to give you a refresh on what we discussed back in June in terms of the audit plan, to provide an update in terms of what's happened since June, and then kind of set the scene a little bit for the February committee, so to kind of set out what you will see in the reporting to the February committee. So if we trawl back to June, when I brought the audit plan, we reported 6 risks to the financial statements, and these are areas where we have added focus There was no value for money risks identified at that point either. In terms of those risks, you may recall we had one new one in terms of the adoption of a new accounting standard, IFRS 16 for leases, and the risk around valuation to property had increased following the appointment of a new valuer. I think it's also worth just touching on the context, so wider than Breckland, in terms of where we are with the process that the government kind of announced earlier this year to put the whole system back onto a sustainable footing. And that process had 3 stages. There was stage 1, reset, which was basically the statute that brought in the backstop dates. So that's in place, and that's in place for the next 3 years after this one. Stage 2 was the recovery, and that's essentially getting on with the work, which is where we are now. Stage 3 was the reform, so that was the systematic changes to financial reporting, to looking at the audit scope, to setting up the local audit office. Those progressing, but not in place at the moment, and I think they're the ones that we'll start to see a really fundamental change to the sector. So since June, the council published the accounts in line with the 30th of June deadline. We've finished off our scope and strategy work, our walkthroughs, which is understanding of your key systems, value for money, and the majority of the work on the statement of accounts. The majority of that was done through July, August. So for the February committee, I'll bring the audit results report, and that will set out the findings from that audit. 3 bits I'll just highlight to you now. So within that report, we've now included what we call a financial statement reporting assessment. So it's kind of an assessment on the council's processes for producing accounts by the deadline, the quality of those accounts, the quality of the supporting records, the relationship that we have with the finance team in terms. So a lot of the kind of metrics that we see leads to essentially the perfect audit, which is what we're trying to get to. So that will come within that report. Also within that report, that will set out what you would have seen in the 23-24 audit results report, where we set out all of your significant accounts and we showed the level of assurance that we'd got on each of those areas. So you can start to see how we're rebuilding that assurance. And it will have a comparison to 3.4 and 4.5. And then lastly, there will be within the appendices, we've kind of set out the trajectory to get back to a clean opinion. And that's as set out in the guidance issued by the National Audit Office. And we'll kind of plot where Breckland is in relation to that. And there's a number of caveats to that in terms of how the future audits go. What I would say from the work that we've done, that report will show that there are a few areas within the accounts that we will not be able to complete all planned procedures because of the adequacy of the supporting records. And we've been working closely with Alison and her team to kind of agree and narrow those areas down. So that will be in that report, and that obviously then reflects on some of the findings and some of the areas that we identify a need for improvement. So I'll stop there, but more than happy to expand on any of those aspects.
Questions? I think there's some concern about valuation of assets. Is that correct? And I presume part of that is due to change of valuer. And in having concern, do you do a direct comparison between, if you like, inflation adjusted old valuation compared with new valuation, or is it just their process of valuation that's an issue?
So yeah, valuation of land and buildings is one area. We're not going to be able to complete procedures. I wouldn't say that's directly down to the change in valuer. I wouldn't say we're reporting concerns about the valuer that's been appointed by the council. I think it's kind of the stage above that, if you like. So it's all the reconciliations and the starting point for us to be able to pick samples and test the valuations within there. But when we do the testing, then essentially we kind of almost mirror what's been done by the valuer, but apply our own processes to that as informed by our own real estate in terms of, okay, are these acceptable processes as informed by the RICS book?
And I guess those have sort of regional views to be taken as well, do they? Alison, have you got any further comment on that bit of the process?
Just really to repeat what David has said, that it's not necessarily the valuer. There was a combination of reasons internally why the information that EY would have needed to give them assurance over the numbers in our balance sheet for the valuation. So we'll be doing a lot of work internally, ready for the 25-26 accounts, to make sure that we can provide the assurance that EY need in those areas.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? Okay, thank you, David, for that update, and we'll look at the detail in February. Okay, then we move on to item 10, Ryan and the Strategic Risk Report, pages 30 to 58.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So Councillor Webb sends her apologies that she can't be here today, so I will be covering off her normal introduction. So this is the Q3 risk report. As you'll see within the report, the majority of these updates were done in late November and early December. So that is obviously reflective in the text. And there's a couple of areas which I just want to highlight to begin with. So firstly, you'll notice the removal of the devolution risk. Also, I never want to be too self-congratulatory to the committee whilst we're here. It was your idea to separate out the devolution risk and the LGR risk. So that has made it quite easier for this session today. We've removed that basically on the understanding of looking into devolution a little bit more, whether it now meets the criteria for a strategic risk. We've taken the decision at this time that we don't believe it meets that criteria. LGR remains on the risk register, and as you'll see within that, there is now a target on the LGR risk, which we previously didn't have. There's a minor formatting error there where we've not included the numerical bit, just the scoring bit. So it's a target of 8, which is 4 by 2. The other area just to highlight as well is the local plan nutrient neutrality risks. So we've previously written within that our aim is to merge the nutrient neutrality risk into the local plan risk before the end of the calendar year. That's on the basis that nutrient neutrality, we think, is going to be an element of the local plan risk rather than a standalone strategic risk moving forwards. There's a couple of elements which we've highlighted in the report that we're just waiting on the outcomes of around bills and ecological things. We're being a bit cautious with regards to that, just because I think previously, back in 2023, there was the announcement around the Levelling Up Bill amendment from Michael Gove, which would have resolved nutrient neutrality, and I think we tried to take that off the risk register then. That then didn't come to anything, so we had to add it back in. So we've now sort of updated our stance to go, rather than the end of the calendar year to merge them, we're looking at the new financial year to merge those risks. The only other element I just want to highlight today is the Q4 report, which is coming to you in February. Obviously, with the sign-off dates for that, that's going to be written in early January. So it may be a case that we don't see risk movements again within that report, just because we're not expecting that many announcements between now and Christmas, and then through the sign-off period, that will have to go to our internal CMT, middle of January, coming here on the 12th of February. Obviously, happy to answer any questions the committee have got around risks in the report.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Ryan. Just a quick short one from me. It's not highlighted as an unusual risk. In Q3, we've got the waste strategy is scored as 15, which is sort of on the high side. I know operationally that may pose some implementation risks, service delivery and so forth, and just how confident you are in terms of that getting implemented and any issues going forward. That's the only question I've got. Thank you.
So I think there's a couple areas around waste strategy, which is our target date for the implementation, the government target date for implementation. The government target date is particularly challenging, and we've always flagged that was going to be challenging to get there. So, I mean, Mark's here obviously from a project perspective, and previously we've said about what our date is and versus the government date. From a service delivery perspective, there is something in there around the unknown burdens funding, and what we have sort of done, and obviously Ali can expand on this if needs be, is within the budgets there will be provision so that service delivery can continue whilst that remains an unknown. But that's sort of our stance around it at the moment. Of there will be challenges around implementation, but we've taken steps to mitigate that as much as we possibly can.
Linda.
Yes, just a quick one. The waste strategy again. There's a reference at the bottom of the big the second paragraph of notes that says further funding announcements for transitional costs are expected in January 2025 and revenues and burdens funding in March, April 2025. Have we had a long wait, or should that say 2026?
Yes, that should be 2026. That should. So thanks for pointing that out. I'll make that amendment.
I think I read somewhere that the additional burdens funding was going to be incorporated, but not separately identified in the settlement figure. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We won't actually know the value of what we're getting. It
So
will just be included.
it's smoke and mirrors element. David.
On the strategic contract management, it says they're all generally long-term contracts. I'm just wondering whether, is there any risk associated with LGR and the outcome that that might result in some of these contracts needing to be ended prematurely?
It's an interesting question, which I don't have an answer for today. I can go away and look at that. I need to speak to the contracts team about that, but that's obviously a national issue when it comes to devolution and LGR. So I will need to clarify our stance and what specific contracts that would impact.
I mean, I think my rough understanding on that is the contracts have contractual values, so there will be a period of overlapping priorities, should we say. Alison.
Yeah, it's a really key work stream as part of LGR. In theory, the contracts will novate across to the new authority, whatever shape that takes. However, what we need to do really as a group of councils is start working towards when our contracts come up and see where we can start aligning end dates and extensions if necessary. And so that will form a large part of the work starting next year.
On the rising temporary accommodation cost risk, the target date of the 1st of April 26 is asterisked, but I don't know what the asterisk is for.
So I believe this was a couple of quarters ago and then updated in the risk policy last time I brought that. We have to put target dates on all our risks effectively. The asterisks related to those risks is we think those are going to be very long-term risks. So when we come to review these risks every year, that is likely to roll over to, so that will turn to the 1st of April 2027 when we do our Q1 review next year. It's similar to the cybersecurity risks and stuff like that, of rather than putting a very far date in the future on that, we will review that annually. At the moment, what we're saying by putting asterisks there is we believe into 26, 27, there will still be a strategic risk around the rising cost of temporary accommodation.
Yeah, we're currently at 20 of the target of 4. We're unlikely to solve that in 2 quarters.
Yeah, our numbers have been coming down, but they've started to plateau a little bit. So there'll be a review in January. It might not be a case within the report itself that there is a change around that risk, but there'll probably be a verbal indication I can give, just because we've sort of started to sit around the 90s, previously having been as low as the 80s. Obviously, our highs were well in the hundreds. So there is an opportunity to look at lowering that risk slightly based on the numbers coming in, and obviously the investment that the council's made around temporary accommodation. But given that we tend to see a rise in cases in January, I just want to see how that plays out first before we make a decision around lowering or keeping that risk at that level.
And in assessing a target date, presumably you look at the direction of travel of the risk as well.
Yeah, so we look at the direction of travel and we sort of will look as to what we think is feasible. Whilst it is potential in the update in January that we go, we believe that we could hit this target date by April 2027. I would say it's unlikely at the moment, but if we thought we could, we'd obviously remove that asterisk and say, we believe obviously over the next 12 months that we can meet the target on that. So yeah.
And where the target date extends beyond the life of this council, what do you do?
Again, an interesting one in terms of how we think about that. We do look at obviously the risk profiles of the other councils within Norfolk and try and ensure that there is a degree of similarity to an extent in when we're saying some of these risks.
Similarity of approach, yes.
Exactly. So in terms of that, you know, we will continue until the point where we obviously are merged, but there is a view of looking at how everyone thinks about that to ensure there's some consistency. I think that's how we'll approach
And
it.
when we know whether it's 1, 2 or 3 unitaries, presumably the constituent risk managers will get together and streamline an approach.
I talk to my colleagues in sort of Kingsley and around their risk and their performance and stuff like that. So there is a understanding between all of us as to where we sort of sit. So when we do get to the point of merging sort of the corporate areas around sort of performance risk, stuff like that, it should be a easier transition by having those conversations now rather than at a point where we need to sort of do it very quickly, shall we say.
Right. Mark, are you here for this particular item? And do you have any comments to make?
No comments from me. I think Ryan's covered all of those points. I'm here obviously supporting Ryan in terms of risk, but also if there's any project-specific questions as well.
Okay.
I don't have anything to add, unless anyone's got any other questions.
So the major project slippage, I think, is on Attleborough, isn't it? In terms of timing.
Yes, I think when we initially planned the audit schedule a couple of years back, we were expecting Attleborough Leisure to progress a little bit quicker. One, I think that was very optimistic of us to look at that particular timescale, but also we've had things like the new procurement legislation which has come into place, which is obviously very comprehensive and added to that timescale for Attleborough Leisure. So we've taken a decision because we're not yet at the point where we are incurring capital costs for that particular project. We're not in a position yet to obviously go through the audit process, but as mentioned earlier, that will come forward next year.
But there are no items that would stop it happening other than timetable.
Correct, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And does that apply to projects generally?
Pretty
I
much,
know
yeah.
we work on the basis of having shovel-ready projects for other funding that might be available, and I think we're quite good at that compared with some other councils. And I think that the amount of outside funding we are successful in gaining is reflected of that ready-to-move approach.
Okay. Thank
Right.
you.
Any more questions? There are none. So the recommendation is to note the report. Thank you. So now we move on to Alison and the Treasury Management Mid-Year Report, which I think she described as very dry.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd love to make it more exciting. But yes, this is the Treasury Management Mid-Year Report for 25-26. The report covers activity for Treasury for the first 6 months of the year up to the end of September. It's a requirement of the SIPFA Treasury Management and Prudential Codes, and it allows the committee to review our investments, our borrowing, our cash flow, and how we've managed them against the strategy that you approved at the start of the year. Excuse me. Appendix 1 has got the main detail in it, and really in summary, we have operated within our limits. Our investments remain secure. Our investment returns are slightly above expectations as a result of interest rates staying higher, and our internal borrowing position continues to support the capital programme. The report includes Appendix B, commentary from our Treasury Management Advisors, who are MUFG Corporate Markets, on the economic outlook and interest rate forecasts for information. We're not proposing any changes to the strategy at this point in the year, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have on any of the report.
Questions? Just going to the graphs on page 67. The top one, you've got you've got a red line that's above all the other dotted lines. So the bits that are performing that are less than bank rate, what is that saying?
Thank you. Yes, this is part of the commentary, if you like, from MUFG, and really it's just showing that some of the shorter dated investment returns, such as the overnight, are much lower than the bank rate. So if we were to invest overnight or short term essentially you may not get the interest rate that you get at the bank. It's just so showing that. But the Breckland investments have been much better performing than
That's
that.
the second graph, yeah. Or is it that second graph?
No, the second graph, again, is just a sort of backward-looking position, and it does show that the longer dated investments give a better return, but neither of them show the Breckland forecast. That's just a national picture.
Okay, but we get the results of the Breckland forecast as a budgetary advantage.
Yes, that's correct. We do, yeah.
And looking forward, whose bank rate projection do we take in forward budgets?
We do use the MUFG forecasts, which have been pretty good over the years that we've used different advisors. So we use their forecasts as the experts.
Because haven't in the past some of those forecasts been below the line?
Yes, sometimes in the reports we do include below the line items which are part of our paid for advisor service. Right. So often the counterparty limits and things like the forecasts are below the line, yeah.
Okay, but the body of their Appendix B here is definitely for public consumption. Yes. Okay, David.
The investments that we have with some of the local authorities, which themselves will be subject to local government reorganisation, presumably we have reassurance that any debt held or any investment held with these authorities will be carried forward into the successor authorities?
Yes, absolutely. That would, and the sort of key factor underlying all of LGR will be that anything we have will novate to any new authorities. Currently, the timing of all of these means that they'll all come back, the money will all come back to us before any LGR takes place. But it's one to keep an eye on in future as the time gets closer and closer to LGR.
Okay, any further comments? None. So the recommendation is to note the report, which we do. Thank you. So we move on to item 12, which is who's presenting this?
It's me, Chairman.
Okay, doesn't say that here.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm presenting this report on behalf of Rob Walker. So this report, as members will know, all committees currently operate with named substitutes only, and those substitutes must be pre-approved by full council and listed in advance, ensuring clarity, preparedness and political balance. But however, this rigidity can limit flexibility and can also lead to quorum issues when members are unable to attend at short notice. So to improve resilience and attendance, members are asked to consider allowing unnamed substitutes, so any eligible member who is not pre-named, to attend in place of an absent member where appropriate. So the report proposes that we have unnamed substitutes for overview and scrutiny, governance and audit and general purposes, but remain with named substitutes for the planning committee and licensing. And the reason for that is the regulatory training that requirements for members that are in place that we need to have for those two committees. What we're suggesting is that the substitutes must be from the same political group as the member that they are replacing, but they must not already serve on that committee.
Members should inform their political group and democratic services if they are unable to attend a meeting, and it is members' responsibility to identify and appoint a suitable substitute. On the day of the meeting, we ask that that substitute member does notify the Democratic Services Officer present before the start of that meeting to say that he or she will be acting as a substitute for that meeting. And then, of course, we can reflect that in the minutes too. So the recommendations, Chairman, are that number one, that named substitutes remain for regulatory committees, which is Planning Committee and Licensing Committee, and that unnamed substitutes are allowed for overview and scrutiny, governance and audit and general purposes. And then there's a recommendation to full council that the constitution be amended accordingly to reflect the revised substitute arrangements. And this includes updates to the committee procedures and members' responsibilities. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you,
I
Chairman.
was going to say, have individual political groups responded to this, or is now the time to say?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm on fire today. Yeah, thank you very much for your report, Teresa. Yeah, speaking as a member of various committees and chair of one, yes, I welcome the recommendations there and the flexibility. Whilst I sort of acknowledge that there are no regulatory requirements in terms of general purposes, but also in particular of overview and scrutiny, governance and audit, both which I've got an interest in, the report does refer to members' responsibilities. And one of the things that I've been trying to encourage through scrutiny, but I also note at the next full council, there's a bite-sized training session there. And one of the things which is applicable to people on any committees is the need to have things like effective questioning. And also in the work I've done with the Office for Democratic Services for Scrutiny, is looking at the LGA and opportunities for members to keep themselves as fully informed as possible. I'm also putting myself in the position of members who, for example, on this committee, whereas lots of the work is quite detailed and sometimes does require a lot of prior knowledge, we're fortunate in that the members of the committee have generally been pretty consistent in terms of attendance and training and so forth. So although there isn't a regulatory requirement, in terms of the effectiveness committees, it might be, whether it's put in the report or drawing to attention, that members are encouraged to take part in any training that is available to perform the efficiency of their role on that particular committee. That's just my suggestion. Otherwise, thank you very much.
I think that's a useful suggestion. I think it's the other subgroup of partially trained or partially has trained councillors, of those who have previously served on a committee, will have know a bit more about how it works than a complete novice. David.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. I'd like to support what Harry said, because I think there is a case to be made for continuance, if that's the right word to use, in terms of getting a feel for a particular committee that you happen to sit on, and randomly having somebody representing your party go to a committee meeting with no prior experience of that committee meeting. I'm not sure whether that would be positive or not, because I think over the 6 or 7 years now that I've had the privilege of being a councillor and on various committees, cognizance of the role of that committee and what can be done and what can't be done is very important. And, you know, if you're called at the last minute because the recognised substitute is not available, it doesn't actually really occur that much to the independent group because we're very small. But in terms of bringing somebody in at the last minute who hasn't had the experience of that committee, I'm not sure that they would be able to contribute as much as a regular substitute. I don't disagree with the idea of for the attendance thing, but I have some concern for the individual who's suddenly thrown in at the deep end, if that makes sense, because the committee member and the recognised substitute is not available when somebody is sort of thrown into the pot. Thank you.
Teresa.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for clarity, so it will only be Overview and Scrutiny and Planning Committee that will have the recognised substitute. The other committees, Overview and Scrutiny, General Purposes and Governance and Audit, will have no named substitutes, but they will have a political number. So, for instance, David, if you were unable to attend today, then you could go to anyone within your political group, say, I'm unable to attend today, could you attend in my place, rather than having a specific named person.
So there wouldn't be a specific named person at all?
Not for those three committees.
No, that's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, those three committees.
Yeah, no, so not for those three committees.
2 points. One, for clarity, it mentions licensing committee. I think perhaps it should also mention and committee of the licensing authority, because technically that's a separate committee. The other is, while I can see it would be very convenient if I had to find a substitute to know that I could pick from anybody, I don't feel happy that there will be no named substitutes for governance and audit, where I think I struggle sometimes to understand it, and I've been sitting here for years. Throwing somebody else in, A, they may not be able to contribute positively and usefully. B, they may be a handicap to the committee. I appreciate there's a problem if you've got a danger of being inquirate, but I would have said possibly this could be overcome by appointing one more substitute rather than having no substitutes at all. I think experience and training are important on governance and audit as well. So they may be with overview and scrutiny and general purposes, but I've less experience there.
Teresa, do you have a comment on that? It's a bit of an either or at the moment, isn't it?
For me, Chairman, it's for members to decide if they would like to propose it or propose second it and accept this recommendation. If they have alternative recommendations, it's for the Committee of Governance and Audit.
Okay, I mean, an alternative approach is to encourage individual members of your political alliance to attend as an observer on occasions, so that at least they see what happens. But that would be an internal to the group list. Harry. Yes, Harry.
Thank you, Chairman. Just can I pick up Councillor King's point, is that in comparison with overview and scrutiny, where there are 12 members, this is a much smaller committee, and I think the presence or the absence of a member on this committee is going to be disproportionately more than it would be on scrutiny. That's a fairly obvious observation. Thank you.
Perhaps we could, instead of named substitutes, call them preferred substitutes. Do you want to make it a proposal that we retain a named substitute for this committee?
Yes, I think I do wish to propose that Governance and Audit retains named substitutes. And if this proves in due course to be insufficient number of named substitutes, name another substitute rather than having a list of preferred substitutes who may not feel themselves to be quite so linked to the committee.
David.
The various training opportunities available to this committee members, are they open to all members?
Yes, yes they are.
So it could well be that people who may be asked to be substitute members have already taken part in training.
Yeah, I mean, I think if this goes to council, it can be introduced with that sort of wider remit to encourage members to to avail themselves of available training. But going back to Linda's proposal, is there a seconder for retaining name substitutes?
May I just add something?
Yeah.
Personally, it is a personal opinion based on limited experience, but nevertheless quite a bit of experience. I would still like to see a name substitute in the sense of maintaining some continuity in the terms of the committee and the ability of that individual to learn. Training is training, but individual committees are very different. And for the three that we're talking about, I think personally I would prefer to see a name substitute, but the fact, if we need to extend that to say if the name substitute is not available, then that political group can choose one of its own members to attend in their place. Because at least then with a name substitute, you have a sense of continuity and not have 12 meetings a year where you have 12 different people attending from that particular group. I know that's an exaggeration.
Well, I know, but it kind of goes back to me calling it, we're going back to a named preferred substitute,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah, that's fine. I think the experience is the most important thing that I would say at sitting on this committee and overview and scrutiny with Harry. That continuity is quite important, I think, because certain things crop up which we've already discussed previously and they come back onto the agenda, and having somebody who is not familiar with that process, I think would be detrimental.
So if we had a named preferred substitute that didn't stop us having an unnamed substitute attending, that would be that would help towards the avoiding any lack of quorum. Harry?
I would support that, what Dave was suggesting, what you're suggesting, Chairman, in terms of governance and audit. I think with overview and scrutiny, with the sort of the range of things which rotate round, whereas we have the same themes coming up here on a regular basis at this committee, so that's much more relevant to have that consistency, experience, and the named person. It's as we were talking about on this committee, as opposed to scrutiny, which is in a way much more wide-ranging, more within the compass, shall we say, of members who aren't exposed to the excitement of governance and audit on a regular basis.
So Linda, do you want to change your proposal to a preferred name substitute?
If we can have one, we're saying a, are we
group.
specifically limiting that to one, or suggesting that we have?
We can have more than one.
At the moment we've got three. We could have
yeah,
three,
but at the moment we've got 4 Conservative members with one name substitute, and then we've got 1-for-1 cover on the other 2 appointees, which is where we've had a gap today, for instance, in that the name substitute couldn't attend.
I would prefer to see it as named substitutes. Preferred named substitutes, plural, as it is at the moment. And then
it's
the option
that would
to
be
bring somebody in, but only if one of the named substitutes.
Right. And it would then be down to the political group leaders to name the multiple substitutes.
You'd have a backup team on the
side. So if we can incorporate that as a recommendation for, I think there's a general agreement that preferred names substitutes, politically balanced, is what this committee would like for this committee. Yes.
Sorry, Chairman. So can I just be clear in my mind? So the recommendation could read that the named substitutes remain for the following committees: planning, licensing and COLA, and governance and audit. And then unnamed substitutes are allowed for overview and scrutiny and general purposes.
Yeah, I think the only change to the status quo is I would like to see a second name substitute where there is a larger number from this committee.
For governance and audit?
Yes. Yeah?
Yep.
And then we've got a better level of cover. So, so with that, and any other comments on the recommendations? So I've got I'm going to read the recommendations out. Recommendation 1 is that named substitutes remain for regulatory committees, planning and licensing. 2, that unnamed substitutes are allowed for the following committees: overview and scrutiny and general purposes. And then we're going to add a third category that named substitutes will remain for audit and governance, subject to an increase in numbers. I think that yes, an increase in substitute numbers, yes. And then item 3 is to recommend to full council that the constitution be amended accordingly to reflect the revised substitute arrangements. This includes updates to the committee procedures and members' responsibilities. So could I have a proposer for those 3 recommendations, please? Harry, and a second, Linda. Thank you. So that is our recommendation to council. Everyone happy? Everyone clear? Good. So then we've got an item 13, amendments to the constitution, which is what we've just done, really. We don't need both. So then we go on to item 14, the work programme, starting at page 78. Alison, have you got any comments?
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm happy with the forward plan for the financial items.
I mean, at some point we will have to introduce LGR-related business to that forward programme, but perhaps we can have an item to discuss that in the. Is it the June meeting? Is it June after February? In the June meeting to discuss LGR issues relating to governance and audit. So at least we can start talking about it and identify further on in the work programme what we need to be thinking about. Yes, happy? Does that? Julie's smiling, so yeah, okay. So that the next meeting is the 12th of February, 2026. This is, unless you're on scrutiny, this is the last meeting before Christmas, so I wish everyone a Merry Christmas and, of course, a prosperous New Year.